Good afternoon, Campuseros. How is everybody today? Welcome to our last session of Reboot the World Campus Party's first ever digital edition. We are so excited to have Laura Merling from Solemn Consulting close us out today and present the 5 pillars of digital transformation. I'm going to throw it over to Laura now.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate it. All right, welcome everyone, and looking forward to today's discussion. We have a lot of stuff to cover. It's going to be great. This is all information that's been gathered over the last 10 or 12 years of the digital transformation work that I personally have been doing, and then also doing through Slalom. So looking forward to sharing with you. All right, let's get started. So I kind of want to start by where we are in the world today. Loved this quote from Peter Drucker. The greatest danger in the times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. The reason I use this is the world has changed as we all know it, hence we're here instead of all meeting in person. But how do we think about how we shift moving forward, not just even in the short term, but what does this really mean about how we thought about things on a long-term horizon? So couple examples I wanted to share. This is some stuff I thought might be interesting for you. Innovation in the time of crisis. There are 2 scenarios, at least in the US history, where there has been a crisis, and following that crisis, there has been tremendous business growth. And so thinking through where you need to go is really, really critical. One is the 2008 crisis, which I thought was super interesting, that within the following year, there were 550,000 new businesses started, which had been the highest rate in 14 years. My guess is we'll see the same coming out of where we are today. We've already seen in a couple industries, people had to change things overnight. The question is, how do you keep that momentum going? A few examples. So in education, we were actually working with an education client talking about a 5-year horizon for growth and change, and all the things they wanted to do online with students. We actually had to help them shift that within 2 weeks. So it went from mostly, I'll call it butts and seats, to online within a 2-week time horizon. In the automotive sector, think about it. If you bought a car recently, at least in the last probably 90 days, you went from what used to be an experience inside of a dealership to doing it end-to-end online, or at least the majority of it online. Dealers have been slow to move to make that transition, and yet they had to overnight. Retail. In retail, there's a local store by me, which I thought was super interesting. They went from, they were going to test out in a couple of stores, they were going to test out using, we'll call it attendantless shopping. So you just self-checkout. They ended up rushing that and doing it inside of 3 weeks from the time they actually had to shift the way they facilitated purchasing of groceries in the store. And they did it in 3 weeks. It was a little clunky, but they actually got it up and running. And in manufacturing, we've seen and been part of helping think automotive manufacturers go from manufacturing cars to manufacturing ventilators overnight. Overnight's all relative for them, but it felt like overnight, given the normal time it takes to shift a manufacturing environment. The question is, all those things that we did quickly, how do we think about preparing ourselves to do those ongoing? And digital is the foundation and framework for doing that. So this is a chart I love to share. This chart gets updated frequently, but it's sort of how do you look at all the things going on in the world and how that might impact you? And then we use this, it's called a PEST, political, economic, social, and technological. It's a framework that a lot of folks use. We try to track it, and I personally try to track it almost daily with my handy dandy Flipboard. But it's just what's going on in the world, and how do we think about how that's going to impact our business, and how can technology put you in the frame to do that? A couple of these that are super interesting, or at least that I found interesting. Some I have updated numbers for, some I'm still looking for. But if you look at the AR, VR global market. By 2025, the original number was 35 billion for the market size for that segment. Within, I think it was about the end of April, early May, when I went to look at the new number, it was a $91 billion market by 2027. So 3x the market size. And a lot of that had to do with how we saw people engaging and interacting online. and those experiences that were expected and created. Another one was the $4.4 billion global conferencing market. So it was $4.4 billion by 2025. And of course, overnight, you had Zoom alone was worth $4 billion. So just thinking about how you look at these trends and what happens, and are you ready to support them? And so part of what these 5 pillars do is give you a framework so that you can actually adjust your strategy based on where the industry is going, whether it be technology or businesses. So let's kind of move ahead and talk about that. There's 5 basic pillars to your digital strategy. One is the business vision, and this seems normal. It seems like it's an easy thing to do. But part of that business vision is really looking out and tying tightly your business vision with your digital vision. They are one and the same. The digital transformation technology helps you get there, right? It is the way of the future. We'll take a look at each of these more deeply. The next one is the customer. Do you really know your customer? One of the things that is happening right now, quite a bit actually, is we're seeing folks that are normally in the business sector that sell B2B looking all the way downstream to the consumer sector. So I'll give you a great example. I was talking with an aluminum manufacturer. They make, raw aluminum. They make it. They then sell it to another company who then creates and turns it into cans. That company then sells it to a company that sells soda or pop or whatever you want to call it in your domain. But that whole value chain, the aluminum manufacturer never thought about how consumers at the end are going to consume that soda or that pop, or how long they'd want to consume it. They didn't look all the way down the value chain. They just looked to their immediate B2B customer. That's a pretty long value chain. And so thinking through, do you really know who the end customer is from a consumer perspective? Because consumers are driving the purchasing, right, of everything that we think about on a global scale. Technology alignment is super important. One of the most frequent things that we see is a misalignment on technology. I just had a conversation with a company the other day, and I said, let me guess, you need your APIs sooner than you're getting them. And so your front-end strategy, your front-end applications you're building are far and ahead of your APIs that you need, and there's a misalignment. Oh, by the way, you're probably also rotating out some old infrastructure. How do you think about that? And where do you build, and how do you align what you're trying to do from I'll call it now, near and far horizon into your technology capability? So it's aligning your technology with your business vision, and we'll spend some time on that. And then there's metrics and measurement. Again, it seems like a no-brainer, but we'll find many a times that there's not really accountability on metrics for adoption. Let's roll out something new. Let's try a new experience, but not really measuring adoption or having a plan for how that's going to get adopted, or tracking the growth that you expected from a revenue perspective. So we'll take a look at some interesting metrics around that, both on the business side and on the delivery side. And then the last one is governance. It is a 4-letter word to most people. People do not like this word, but you know what? It actually gives you the foundation for things like when COVID happens, how do you go back and reprioritize? It gives you a framework and foundation to think about reprioritization, both from the things that you're doing, but also from an investment perspective. And so governance is really a tool to leverage to be able to make quick adjustments and assessment. All right, so let's dive in. Business vision. So on business vision, what I like to do is start by saying the business vision really is your digital strategy is your business strategy. Your digital vision is your business vision. They should be tightly tied, which also then means that vision has to be aligned with the CEO, and the CEO should be the one having influence and guidance and have buy-in in terms of what you're trying to do from a digital strategy perspective. Why do I say that? Because it impacts your entire organization. A couple examples of how it impacts your entire organization that will be really meaningful for you if you haven't actually been there yet. So one of them, think about this. You have a headquarters maybe in Europe, but you are operating an office in the US. There are requirements that come from Europe or from corporate, how do they align with what you're trying to achieve in your market in the US or in Asia? How do you make sure all of those things get aligned, and how do you prioritize? We see that time and time again, where there's not necessarily alignment in terms of how investments happen or priorities of resources. Another example, and this one has happened to me personally, but also to some of the companies that I've worked with. When you're creating, many times a digital vision will include digitizing products. So taking something that was physical and now making it a digital-based, outcome-based sales. When you do that, quite often what you'll see is because of digital, it lets you go across business units for an offer. And so what happens is you end up having people fighting over, well, who gets the revenue for this new digital product? Where it hasn't even been out there yet. There's many examples of that. So imagine if I'm a company that sells parts in an aerospace sector, and each business unit sells a different aspect of those parts. But yet what I want to do is sell kind of, I'll say, virtual based or outcome based. Instead of selling fuel components, I want to sell fuel efficiency. Well, guess what? Who gets that revenue now when normally those components are sold out of 3 or 5 different business units? So it impacts the whole organization. So it's really thinking about how you link your business strategy to your digital strategy. And usually what we also like to do is put it in a framing. When we ask folks, what does digital mean to them? If you ask 5 different people, you will get 5 different answers. We try to frame it, or I personally try to frame it around these 3 areas: operational efficiency, customer experience, and new revenue. Operational efficiency will mean different things based on your industry. If you're in manufacturing, it might mean things like your manufacturing scorecard. So most manufacturing facilities have a scorecard that range from quality metrics to on-time delivery metrics. In customer experience can be measured in a bunch of different ways, but what does it mean for customer experience? NPS is a lagging indicator. You want to look for leading indicators. How do you know that people are appreciating the new experience that you've created? Is that experience tied to driving new revenue? Is it retaining existing customers? Is that customer experience for your B2B customer? It's looking at things like adoption rates of the platform that you've rolled out, or task completion rates. So it's making sure that you've got, what is my vision, and then how am I going to measure it? And I know metrics and measures come late, but if later on in our discussion, but if you think about it as part of your business strategy, what do I want out of this? You'll know what metrics to set later. New revenue, again, it's how am I going to monetize? Is this allowing me to sell fuel efficiency instead of a fuel part, right? So it's, what is that new revenue stream? All right, so let's dive into this a little bit more. One of the ways that I think about framing a business vision is across now, near, and far. And I did not create this. I will tell you, I borrowed this from my friend, Jim Hackett, who's the CEO at Ford, and having the opportunity to work with him, created this framework when he was at Steelcase. And the idea is you've got to kind of know where you're going in the far, what your vision is. And far, we can talk about what these horizons are in a minute, but you kind of got to know where you're going so that you can start building that foundation now. But you want to be able to deliver value in the now while you're building towards the far. So normally in the horizons that I look at, now I tend to look at a 12 to 18 month, near 18 months to maybe 3 years, and in the far, kind of a 3 to 5 year horizon. Now, again, it's all about creating flexibility in that framework and tracking what trends are happening to then be able to adjust it. But you kind of want to know where you're going. And a great example of that, the perfect example is I was working with a company on electric vehicle strategy. So electric vehicle growth is happening. We know it's coming over the next few years. How quickly? There's a variety of different numbers, but you got to take some estimate around that. But knowing where you think it's going to be in 5 years, I think in the US, some of the estimates show around 2% of what we call total car park. So all the cars that are in the market and have been purchased, about 2% will be electric, which sounds like a low volume, but it's pretty high volume. But this company was trying to figure out, well, what charging infrastructure do I need? based on that volume. So they had to estimate the volume, they had to estimate it by city. And then what we had to do was help them think through, well, what infrastructure is needed to support the volume for that particular location? And one of the things in planning that came up was in a certain state, it takes 2 years to get additional transformer or a new transformer that would support the power that they needed for electrification of vehicles or for charging vehicles at a high speed. So in order to get the chargers that they want, they needed a 2-year horizon. Had they not kind of thought about where they were going, they would have actually missed the mark in being able to deliver if they waited till they got there and said, okay, we need a new transformer. So again, it's thinking about that horizon. It's setting in place the foundations now for where you want to go while still delivering immediate value. So there's another way to look at this, and it's kind of tying your business strategy and outcomes that you have for your digital vision and your business vision with the now, near, and far. So this is kind of aligning that digital strategy to the outcomes and a time horizon. It's a great, little matrix that lets you say, I'm going to deliver operational efficiency, customer experience, new revenue. This is where I'm going in the far, but these are the steps I'm going to take to get there. If you try to share with folks where you're going in the far, they might look at you like you're crazy. They might say we can never get there. So part of it is showing them a high-level roadmap of how you get from where you are today to where you're going to be in the future and where you want to go. So it's a great combination of kind of like, here's the outcomes I'm trying to do, and here's the time horizon in which I'll see those. Now, each one of these boxes, I will tell you, if you looked on the charts on my walls, each one of those boxes has a bunch of items under it, but it gives you a great starting point to at least have this high-level framework and have a conversation around. All right, so digital investment. The reason I put this in digital vision is because investment is a question that I get asked all the time. I've been doing this since 2012, helping people with digital transformation, actually probably since 2006 when I was working in an API company, and that's part of what got me into this. But how do people invest money in digital, and how do you think about it? Part of it is just thinking about, this is why you want to know, am I targeting operational efficiencies or am I targeting new revenue? And usually what we see is there's kind of 3 modes. There's kind of the conservative mode. There's a moderate, like, okay, I'm on my way. I want to be a little more risky. I might do some things, more investment in new revenue. And then I want complete disruption. These models tend to change by industry, but they also tend to change based on maturity. So for example, quite often in manufacturing, you will see folks focus on operational efficiency. Why? Because I can see the immediate outcome. It's easier to see cost savings than it is to see new revenue. New revenue takes time. You've got to convince people to buy in whatever that new business model is. You've got to get growth and adoption. Oh, by the way, you might actually still have another product that is competing with that new product you create. So you want to ramp it slowly so you don't lose that existing customer base. In some cases, you might say, I worked with one company who said, you know what, actually, we're going to spend 90% of what we do on new revenue. At least for the near term, we want to focus on finding new revenue opportunities off of connected services, digital capabilities, digital services. How do I create a new revenue stream on that? So just kind of wanted to share with you this digital investment portfolio, because this is something that we get asked quite frequently. And this can be seen as your digital investment. You may have IT investment that gets included in this. We'll talk about, digital and IT need to have a partnership hand in hand, and you'll see that in a couple of slides. They're not separate, they're related. You need underlying infrastructure to work. If that doesn't work, your digital investment might not work. A great example here is I was working with a company in manufacturing. We were rolling out something for the manufacturing plant floor users, a dashboard for them to use, partly to manage takt time, but also quality and delivery. So it was a little bit of everything in the dashboard. But what happened was they were trying to use that dashboard in real time. And what happened was the infrastructure in the production facility was such that the connectivity was bad. And so it was taking a response time of anywhere from 20 seconds to 40 seconds. And so by that time, they were losing time and momentum, especially if you're tracking takt times. And so they couldn't actually use the new product that was built or the new dashboard. Why? Well, because they had this lag in the infrastructure internally. So they're all tightly tied together. And so it's thinking about, again, where are you going and what are the pieces you need to change under it? All right. Number 2, the customer. Customers are at the core of your business. And I don't just mean your direct customer, I mean all the way down to the consumer, as I was talking about before. There are tons of examples in the B2B space where companies are making these shifts. Another example, if you guys had seen it, Unilever has a food service division, and there was actually an article about it a couple weeks ago. They had a food service division that was supporting grocery stores. And so in a B2B model, they had built their e-commerce platform such that in the long run, it could support purchases from consumers. They were actually able to make the switch within about 5 days from just selling B2B to selling B2C. And that actually now is the majority of their revenue was coming from B2C during this time of COVID where things were shut down. It was about 60% of their total revenue came from that stream. They were able to flip on a dime, but they understood what the end consumers' needs were. They had been doing research on that segment. So we're going to talk about 3 areas. 1 is know your customer. 2, know what do I want and where I want it. We'll go through a really interesting example on that. And then the last one is customer experience. What does customer experience mean to you and what does it mean to them? And making sure aligned, and this goes, customer experience is really tied to know your customer. Tightly tied to know your customer. So let's take a look. When I think about know your customer, I think about personas, and everybody creates personas in a different way. But I just want to share with you, this is an example of a persona that was created for something that we were looking at in the automotive sector. Interestingly enough, then shared this exact same persona with somebody in media and entertainment. And from that, they said, oh, this person drives a Toyota Tundra. They live in this particular state. They're in the Dallas suburbs. They want a tow hitch. So there's a little bit more detail that wasn't here, but they're interested in a tow hitch. Well, guess what? This person probably most likely likes motocross sports. It was a completely different way for them to think about who their end customer was and how they thought about what brands they affiliated, what motivated them, what were their just general pain points. So it's really getting them to look differently, both the automotive customer as well as the customer in media and entertainment, to think about who is that person and what are the things they're thinking about and looking at. So now let's take a look at that persona. There's another way to look at your customer. So one is through a persona. The other mechanism for knowing the customer is knowing what I want, when I want, and where I want it. This example was something was working with a couple customers in the logistics segment. And when you think about it, as a company working in logistics, you go, I want to move a good. It's either perishable or durable. And why do you care? Because it either needs to be heated or refrigerated, or it doesn't. If it's durable, it might be breakable. But it's more about, is it refrigerated or non-refrigerated? And then as you start to go down it, okay, is it B2B or B2C? I want to know who I'm moving it to. And is it long haul or local? Seems pretty basic, makes a lot of sense if you're in the logistics world. But if you look at it from the customer view, not from your company view, it looks like this. There's a package. It's a good that I want to move. I'm either home or I'm away. Notice they don't care if it's durable or if it's not. What they care about is I'm home or I'm away. Do I want it now or later? And do I want it to my door front or do I want it to me? Do I want it to a locker or do I want it to my door? It's a completely different view. And the way you solve the problem is different. And the way you think about how you solve the problem for the customer is different. The reason I show this is time and time again, I'll work with somebody and even in the customers or even companies I've worked at, and they'll be like, we did this, we interviewed all these customers, we've created these customer journey maps, we've got it. We've got all this great information. We know what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And when I look at the journey map looks like the company journey map. How am I as a company going to service that customer? not the actual customer view. So all that great work around how you think about how you approach a customer and all the great interviews that you've done leads to the wrong, it leads to the wrong journey map. So it's just this oversimplified way about talking about journey mapping and making sure you're looking at it from a customer view and how it gets implemented and executed. All right, so let's talk about customer experience. So now, customer experience here, this is about, do you really know your customer? Do you know physical and digital interaction points? Do you understand their needs? If you think about the market segments, if you think about what a millennial is looking for today versus maybe what a Gen Xer like myself was thinking about, they care a lot about transparency. They want your company to be purposeful, right? And apologies to millennials, not trying to overgeneralize, but just trying to make sure people are really thinking about, do you know what the expectations are for that customer? By the way, the full-on born digital generation was ready for COVID. A lot of others weren't necessarily ready. So it's understanding, what are the things around expectations? How do they want to interact with you? Remember, an interaction that I have in one store, I'm going to expect to have in another, or an interaction I'm going to expect to have online, I'm going to expect to have that same interaction somewhere else. Just think about it. Several years ago, we were all wishing that everybody else would do one-click checkout like Amazon had done. It's the same thing if you think about, like, if anybody's gone into the self-checkout lines. If you do self-checkout, you're like, why isn't everybody else doing self-checkout? This has been around for a long time. These interactions are things that people are expecting. The same thing could be true for biometrics. Think about where we are today and how important biometrics might be for that convergence of physical and digital moving forward. So just trying to get you to think about, what does customer experience really mean? And what are their expectations? What have they already seen? What have they already experienced and used? Think about it yourself. A lot of times people don't think about it from themselves and how they think about how they interact with things. So just even think about yourself as a consumer and how you experience different content or physical experiences. All right, so technology enablement, the moment you've all been waiting for. No, I'm kidding. So every company is a technology company. You have to be. It's what runs your underlying business. And aligning your technology roadmap with your business strategy is really important. It can't just be that you're there to keep the lights on as a technology organization. You are there tightly tied to the business, right? The things you see over in the box here on the right-hand side, those are really things that when I go to companies and when I've worked at companies, all become like, if you don't get these right, you can't actually get the digital strategy right. How do you have a single view of a customer? Anybody want to do what's called clienteling? So imagine taking an experience from online to you go into the store and they know what you've been looking at. They know what you've purchased. There's one retailer, Burberry, was known for doing single view of the customer, right? I would go and purchase something here. You'd go to another store, they'd know what you purchased. You go online, you could see what you purchased. You'd go to another country, you'd go to London, and they would know what you purchased while you were in the US. Single view of the customer. That customer could be me, a person. A single view might be a single view of a car. A single view might be a single view of an aircraft. Think about digital twins and what that value could be is how it was designed versus how it's being flown. And so maybe the single view is of an aircraft. Multiple billing systems, really interesting here. And I'll show you a chart. But most companies, because they've been built by conglomerates or are now conglomerates, they have multiple billing systems on the back end, which also makes it painful for you to have a single view of a customer from a billing perspective. But I worked with one company, we were trying to go from 62 billing systems down to 10. Our goal was just to get to 10. That was to create new efficiencies, but also to improve customer experience. We had a particular client that had a team of people, 10 people that actually worked on settling their bills across their company for us as a business. They had 10 of their own employees, and we had 3 people supporting them. Not the position you want to be in. Another example, worked with another company that had 500 plus data sources. How do you know what data is the source of truth? How do you actually see across those 500 data sources? How do you actually get to be able to look at creating, a data platform concept, and how could you do a digital twin? How could you have a single view of a customer if everybody has their own view? If you have 5 business units and you sell B2B, let's say you're selling aircraft parts, every one of those business units has their own view of your single customer, but you have a single customer. Maybe it's an airline that's Delta Airlines or KLM or whoever it might be. How do you give them a single view of themselves? How do you have a single view of how that customer interacts with you? Talked about legacy systems. You got to be able to be ready to replace those. Infrastructure, again, the same thing. I talked to you about the example of we were trying to do something on a plant floor. The response time took 30 seconds on average. It was 20 to 50 seconds or 40 seconds. You weren't going to actually look at that thing, right? Nobody was going to use it. So it's knowing that the infrastructure is ready to support it. The same is true in an IoT environment. If you're trying to do IoT somewhere, how's your connectivity? Do you have that edge computing infrastructure in place? Do you have the right level of connectivity to support what you want to be able to do? So all these things have to fall in place. So what does that look like? It looks like this. This is a map that tries to put in perspective to your executive team, I can't do X until Y happens. It's an oversimplified view of your technology roadmap, but this is something that I use to explain to people timing. At the very bottom are products that I might want to be digitizing. So I'm taking physical products and making them digital. Guess what? I can't sell those digital things until they're digital, or maybe I can only sell pieces of it. So the revenue gets accrued over time. You've got your core systems like a PLM for engineering. You've got inventory, billing, you've got infrastructure, platforms, things like an API abstraction layer. You've got a data platform. Maybe you've got a CRM system that you're putting in place. You're putting in place a new one, or you're merging CRMs. On the front end, you've got these applications. What happens is everybody starts with the, the front end application. Sorry, 1 second. Everybody ends up starting with the front end application. And why? Because it's the thing that your customers see. But if you don't have the thing like an API abstraction layer separating that, as you change out your core systems and you try to update those legacy systems, you're going to keep rebuilding that front end. You're going to keep rebuilding that API layer. So it's really thinking through what are all the pieces of the puzzle. And that's why having that multi-year strategy and working backwards and knowing what things tie together is super, super important. All right. This is another view of technology alignment. This is one that shows you that, technology and your digital strategy and your business strategy are all aligned. Your core business systems support the things that let you build that transformation, that lets you drive innovation. If you don't have security in place, if you don't have the right IT infrastructure, if you don't have the business applications, this is a great graphic when you're trying to explain to an IT team, look, we're partners in making digital transformation happen. Usually, like I said, people just think it's the front end, but it's the entire stack that will make it work over the long run to achieve your business outcomes. So it's a really great diagram to have that conversation. I've worked with companies to make slight modifications to this around how they look at core business systems or enablers. But in general, it helps you get everybody aligned on how to think about it. Metrics and measurement. If you don't have these, it makes it really hard to know if you're being successful. I will tell you, one of the most interesting companies I ever worked at, enjoyed working at AT&T, but we could tell you down to the individual, every movement that you did, every little transaction that you did, we could tell you what the cost was to us. Was it $1? Was it 5 cents? Was it 50 cents? We wanted to measure every transaction because what we were trying to do was see how we could create a differentiated customer experience and shift it from a physical interaction or a phone call. Is there a way for you to be able to solve that online? And so it's knowing the cost of the transaction, but also understanding where you're falling out. It's understanding where did you fall out in that flow and what did we not do correctly in that point in time. So your metrics are going to be tied to business outcomes like revenue or operational efficiency, cost reductions. It's going to be tied to user experience, and it's going to be tied to operational metrics. So it's outcomes, experience, and operational metrics. And operational metrics, In this case, think about what you delivered and when you delivered it. Did you deliver it on time? Did you deliver it on budget? And oh, by the way, did you also deliver it with quality? So here's a really interesting dashboard. I'd look at this as kind of your overall digital dashboard. A couple of things to think about is when you're doing metrics, you want the finance team engaged. Why? They're going to tell you what the value of a transaction is. They're going to tell you what the cost of a transaction or interaction is. You want to do project level tracking, the whole program level tracking, right? You want it to go all the way down. I want to do program and project level. Then what you want to do is make sure you're having communication around those metrics. Communication might be weekly if you're the digital and IT organization, especially as you start to get into some of the operational metrics. But then your business units. So your business units are the owners, right? You're doing this to drive business outcomes. You want to give them a dashboard that they can view that's specific to their business and the outcomes they were trying to achieve. And then quarterly and executive review. Again, remember, you're trying to get the CEO and the executive team engaged in driving what the strategy is and being aligned with where the investments are and the priorities. Business priorities change. They could change weekly, monthly, they could change overnight, right? As we've all seen. When you look at these metrics, some interesting things to think about here. Digital first metrics, if you're trying to focus on leading with digital, right? How do we create these new digital experiences that are maybe a combination of physical and digital? We looked at what % of things would become digital and over what time horizon. Revenue or SBU targets. So what % of revenue was going to be driven through a digital channel? How did you help drive that through that channel? What was the shift to digital? So for example, and this actually kind of goes back to customer experience, but we were talking to a client the other day in the energy sector, and what this customer was looking to do was say, we want to go from people calling us, we want them to be able to self-serve to solve some of their challenges. How do we actually make that shift from a phone call to online? Well, that's a partnership between your digital team and your customer service team. You've got to be able to track, and you're going to know that there's impacts, because maybe the customer service rep is going to take them back to the experience online and talk them through it, and they'll learn where the problems are in that experience and where they're falling out. Now, the call is going to take longer, but over time, you'll be able to make the digital experience better. So you're going to have to partner with them to say, look, average call time is going to go up, but over, let's say, a 6-month period, your total volume is going to go down of calls because you're improving the front end to make that experience better. Customer experience, you could look at things like CSAT and 4C. I like to look at things like actual task completion rate. What did they go there to do, and did they do it, or did they fall out and call the customer service center? Some other things that might be interesting, things like platform reuse. I had a conversation with a company yesterday in the banking industry, financial services sector, and they were actually targeting, they wanted to be a platform. I'm like, all right, so how are you going to measure that platform? It's based on reuse. Who's reusing it across the company? Who's reusing it as an external partner? How do you measure and think about that? Another one that's super interesting, if you look at number 14 at the bottom, AQI, we actually created that. This was in 2012. We created this primarily because one of the things that would happen is we were all hitting our on-time delivery targets, or pretty close to our on-time delivery targets. But then what was happening was the budgets were getting off, because things shift from being something that you can expense versus capitalize. You could capitalize it while you're building it. As soon as it's in market, it becomes expense. Well, all of a sudden our expense numbers were going up. And what was happening was we were delivering things on time, but we were actually fixing a lot of stuff in production. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect, but you want to have a way to measure it. So we created the application quality index, which lets us measure a production defect rate, and we set targets around that. So again, thinking about what are your metrics and tying your business metrics to your outcomes. Because if you have poor quality in production, guess what? You're not going to have adoption, which then you're not going to change customer experience, and you're not going to grow revenue. All right. Getting to the last section, governance. Governance is again, I said, it's not necessarily a bad word. Governance means you're looking across the business, you're tying together the pieces, you're creating accountability, you want to openly share priorities, you want to openly talk about investments. this is a great way to negotiate investments within the company about who's paying for what and where it's coming from and what the priorities are. It gets asked all the time, especially in digital. And then in digital, partnering with the IT organization, even if they're one, I've been in organizations where they're separate or where they're combined, doesn't really matter. There's still a negotiation around the investment and prioritization. What you want to do is drive accountability, portfolio prioritization, investment, and then we're going to talk about data governance. I'm going to say this is not your grandma's data governance. This is not just about what most folks think of, which is, I want to talk about master data management. This is about data as part of your core business. And we'll come on to that in just a minute. So portfolio prioritization. When you think about your portfolio prioritization, you got to know what it is you're building, and you want to have owners. So you want to create a framework that lets you leverage, that creates levers that says, I'm going to measure based on these things. I'm going to measure the priority based on our current market prioritization. So it's new revenue or it's cost reduction. I'm going to base it on, is this driving value for the customer, for a consumer, or is this driving value internally, right? So you've got to think about those things. And then you want somebody to own it. For every project, you want a business owner. Why? Because you want them to have accountability. You also then want to have whoever the digital owner is. So there's that partnership to ensure that that outcome is going to happen. And then you want it tied to your business priorities. You don't want projects that are running that have nothing to do with a business priority. Now, you will have some foundational projects, maybe like a data platform or an API abstraction layer, but those types of things are going to be tied to a business priority, right? So it's, again, tying all of that together and making sure it's all aligned. Now, another way to look at portfolio governance. So the first was driving accountability and tracking. The next is, we were working with a company, and one of the things that they said is, we are focused on new revenue. We really want to drive new revenue. It's at the core of what we're trying to do over the next 3 to 5 years. Doing a portfolio assessment, what we found was new revenue growth was less than 6%. It was actually less than 5%, was around new revenue growth. The majority of it was around what they called foundational things. It was building projects and tools for employees to use, assuming that then would feed into revenue growth. You really want to think through that. You're telling yourself you want revenue growth. What are you really doing and investing in that's going to drive revenue? Are you creating a way to integrate more directly with your B2B partners? Are you creating a B2C channel? What are you doing, right? How are you creating that? So it's really knowing how you've got your investments allocated and being honest with it. And that's why having the levers and creating the portfolio structure and what those levers are going to be that you use to measure it is super critical. All right. Data governance. So data governance, as I said, is not what you're thinking about. It's not master data management. Data governance is around, data is an extremely valuable asset in your company. How are you going to maximize the value of that data? And I don't just mean by selling it outright, but I also mean about using it for negotiations and setting policies and arbitrating across programs. I had an experience with, we were trying to create a digital solution, and another business unit, we were using some unique data sets to create this business solution, and another business unit was actually giving the same data away for free to a potential competitor. So having some sort of data governance around how you value data, how you're using it, how you think about it for business models. Another great example might be if you're in the automotive sector. One of the interesting things was we were going to do a partnership with Amazon to do delivery to the trunk of a vehicle. Well, guess what? Amazon has Amazon Garage. They sell aftermarket car parts. If all of a sudden they have all the data about all your vehicles, can they now use that same data to sell? Well, guess what? That's competing into where you have your highest margin and highest value, which is in aftermarket car parts. So in the contract, you'd want to make sure that it says, guess what? You have single use case. Your use case is to only do delivery to the trunk. That's why you want to know the car, so you know the trunk size. You can't use any other data about that for any other use case. For that, it's a whole separate contract negotiation. So it's thinking about the business rules and guidance across the business units and within your own contracts. I will tell you, with one company, I actually got the legal team to be my partner in crime. And what we did is we set up a monthly review on some of the contracts that were happening across different businesses and talking about what they needed to look like from a data governance and data access perspective. And so we got all the global legal team together for an initial call, and then we did a round robin follow-up by market. So just how do you get them engaged and how do you make them your partner? So all this governance stuff, metrics, you've got to get finance engaged, governance, you want to get legal engaged and finance engaged, and of course your business units so that they understand what their role is in data governance. One last view of portfolio governance. One way to look at it is around people, process, technology, and information, and looking at it around how it implements and how it's impacted to your strategy. Just thought this might be a great diagram to share with you. How do you bring all the pieces of the puzzle together to say, these are the things that we need to think about from an overall governance perspective, because it does impact all of these areas. And to really be successful, you have to know how you're thinking about accountability, capabilities, what are the processes, what's the demand management, how are you going to manage your portfolio, how do you manage new innovation, right? All these things are critical. Your scorecard around your information, technology, right? We talked about the one interesting thing around technology is one prioritization lever you might use is end state architecture. Is this project aligned to our end state architecture? Because you don't want to build it and then 2 years later pay to rebuild it. So just thought this might be a great overall framework. Now, what we're going to do is put it all together, and I'm going to show you a quick reference guide for asking all the right questions. I won't go through all of them, but this is a quick reference guide. If you think about business vision, customer needs, technology alignment, metrics and measuring, governance, what are the things that you should be asking yourself, your team, your company? You'll see there's a set of questions in each of these. You can follow up with it afterward, but I want to make sure I leave time for questions. So what I wanted to do was kind of jump over and just kind of say, look, each of these things are things you ask yourself internally, ask them to your leadership team, think about it with your IT organization, with the business units, ask them these questions. How do we partner and work together to make things happen? All right, what I wanted to be able to do was see if there were any questions from anyone that we can help you answer.
Yep. Laura, that was great. We do have a couple questions from our campuseros. One is, why do you think companies fail at their digital transformation?
It varies, but there's a couple of main reasons. One, the primary one is most companies do not get aligned on what does digital mean to them? Mm-hmm. And then what are they going to go do? Like, what are we trying to achieve? So what does digital mean? And then what are we trying to achieve? Those are the first two questions I ask every company. And it's interesting. If you go business unit by business unit and ask people, they will not have the same idea. And that's where communication, once you've got it defined and getting the CEO's buy-in, communication is your best friend. Monthly town halls to the global organization, quarterly meetings with the executive team, all of that will get it going in the right direction. But it's a misalignment on what digital means and what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Another question is, one of the campuseros saw on your first slide that 50% of the world's largest companies are going to be based in China now or in the future, I think is what they're
2030,
saying. But
2030.
With 2030. But with COVID and the challenges that we've had now with supply chain, would that percentage or that statement in the future have to be tweaked?
Great catch. Very possibly so, right? We're seeing a lot of folks trying to make sure that they are not single source for their supply chain. So that number was a pre-COVID number. That was a January timeframe number that I pulled that in. So each of those numbers are going to need to be tweaked, tracked, and followed. It's really important, and I gave you just a few, but following PEST, it was super interesting. This aluminum company that I've been working with, it was super interesting because they said they don't know enough about the downstream impacts, the consumer mindset changes and all the downstream impacts on their own business and what it would mean. And they didn't feel like it was flexible enough. So they were looking for a way to create what we were calling a resilient strategy. It doesn't mean that your strategy changes every day, but it just means that you're looking for signals and you're tracking those signals on an ongoing basis. And so we put in place a set of signals for their corporate strategy team to track and follow on an ongoing basis. And so I would say do that because that was a really good catch.
Great. One last question that we have is, after companies put in a digital strategy, right, you get a ton of data. Are they going back and as part of the strategy constantly analyzing that data so that you can tweak and ebb and flow and make your process in the digital space or the digital process even more efficient? Because if you don't do anything with that data, then you can't course correct.
Absolutely. That goes back to, I'm going to kind of go backwards here in my deck. Sorry for the speed return there. But so there's a couple things. It is important to look at the data and look at the data. I mean, we might have been a little overly obsessed, but I looked at revenue numbers for an e-commerce site. So I managed $1 billion e-commerce site. I looked at the revenue numbers daily, but I also looked at the drop-off rates on a weekly basis. Where were people falling out? Where were we losing them? We looked on a monthly basis with our customer service colleagues to say, so it's understanding the importance of the time horizon. The reason you might look at something weekly is because you want to make adjustments or you're doing some A/B testing. The reason you might want to look at it monthly is because it's going to take time to see the shift like a customer service agent. Business units want to know that you're helping them either drive the new revenue or create the operational efficiency. So it is a constant, these dashboards, like this is a dashboard you might share with the executive team on a quarterly basis. There are dashboards that you'll have for yourselves that you'll look at weekly, and there are dashboards you'll have with partners that are monthly. I cannot tell you how important it is to track metrics and communicate them. I constantly have held, when I've been in these roles, monthly town halls so that everybody knows the dashboards, not just me and not just my direct leadership team, but you want everybody to know, right? They're all part of that movement. So it is important to track them ongoing. Absolutely.
Great. And I think one last question that I'm seeing from our campuseros: does digital transformation assist with or disrupt traditional KPIs?
Ah,
The
both.
KPI.
Both. So it depends. I think you'll end up with some KPIs that will remain the same, but in parallel, you'll have new ones. So for example, reducing call volume is something. If you're in the energy space or any kind of utility space, people want to reduce call volume. So that's a KPI you're still going to measure. How it gets reduced, where it gets reduced, how you've automated that process, that's the new KPI, right? So it really depends. It also, now you're going to look omni-channel. So omni-channel means I'm going to do things online, in store, on a mobile device, in a VR, AR experience, in a game, on TV, right? So think Twitch. When you start thinking about all those things and all those interaction points, digital gives you more interaction points, and you want to be able to look at somebody's omni-channel experience. What was their flow-through experience that they created? And so it's yes and, not necessarily a replacement. In some cases, if it's a whole new revenue stream, it will be a replacement. Like if you're trying to get rid of the physical product and only sell the digital, but it'll be an and for the most part.
Well, Laura, I can't thank you enough for wrapping up the first ever Campus Party Digital Edition USA. You've given us a lot of things to think about and a lot for our campuseros and others that are out in the digital virtual world to implement as they go back to their companies. So I just want to really thank you for your time. I look forward to meeting you one day in person, and I wish you a great weekend.
Great. Thank you. Have a great weekend,
you.
everyone. Thanks for joining.
Sure. Bye.
Hello, I'm Robert McGee, Executive Director for the Engineering Society of Detroit, and I'm a proud supporter and sponsor of Campus Party Digital Edition. For 125 years, our society has promoted engineering excellence and innovation, from the rise of the auto industry to the fourth industrial revolution we are experiencing today. Through it all, engineering and technology leaders in Michigan, the state that employs more engineers per capita than any other, have been at the center of our progress. This summer, you have the opportunity to get a taste of Campus Party virtual digital experience. And next summer, the live experience will be held in Detroit in the summer of 2021. Michigan is home to 22 colleges and universities with A Beta engineering programs. We hope you will join us.